Now, I would like to invite four brilliant minds to join me up here to discuss the portable identity and ownership in Web3 games and social networks. So please welcome to the stage the CEO at Disco, Evin McMullen, the CEO at CCP, Hilmar Peterson, and the CEO at Ready Games and moderator of the discussion, David Bennahum. And joining us remotely from Israel is the co-founder and CEO at Addressable, Tomer Sharoni.
Hello, hello. Thank you all for being with us today. We're going to have a dynamic panel on the topic of how identity and ownership shifts in Web3. These are really like elemental, basic questions that we sometimes take for granted. But if you think about it in Web2, so much of the ecosystem and economy that exists on the internet and online is predicated on who owns the identity and all of the things that unlock from there, like whether you're Facebook or TikTok or Steam. These are companies founded on essentially owning an identity, right? Whether it's a social identity in a social context or a gaming identity in a gaming context. What begins to happen as both gaming products and other related products start to authorize the consumers of their products to essentially hold that data? And how does it begin to change the economic dynamic between people who want to talk to those people, what does it mean to own your data ultimately? Is there a benefit beyond a social benefit? Could there be an economic benefit? These are all some of the topics we'll get into. And then I'm going to ask the audience, hopefully, if we have a little time, for questions. So we are going to have some unusually brilliant minds on this panel, and it's a rare opportunity, I think, for folks in the room who have questions around Web3, especially in this area, to ask them. So as we go through this, very much think through questions you may have. So with that in mind, I'm just going to kick it off with some basic intros. And I think, Evin, you came up first. So Evin is the CEO and founder of Disco, XYZ. Disco is working to develop essentially personal identity on-chain with enormous implications for how that works. They have a product called the Backpack, which I had the pleasure of using. I won't say much more, but we're very excited to hear your perspective. Hilmar, CEO of CCP Games. Many of you know who that is. EVE Online, 20 years of operations, one of the largest distributed economies in the world in gaming. You've just raised $40 million for a new Web3 title. We don't know anything about it. We're very interested in learning what are your insights from operating EVE and how have they affected kind of your vision for what a Web3 game can be. And I think as all of us who are game designers or in the gaming industry, this is a very pressing question. And then from Tel Aviv, we have Tomer Sharoni, who is on Zoom. We appreciate that you're able to make it today. We understand what's happening, and so thank you for being here. I will just say Addressable is the next kind of element in this identity shift, which is as this data starts being collected on-chain through users, through publishers, and so forth, how do you interrogate that data? How do you use it to make decisions? When I say use it, it could be from a marketing point of view, right? Which is like, I need to acquire customers. The data set now is no longer in a black box at Facebook or the equivalent. It's in a kind of viewable box on the chain. And what does that imply? Actually, is that uncomfortable for people? I don't know. Like, is it creepy that anyone can see your data? Maybe it's awesome. Is the user going to be rewarded for owning this data somehow in a marketing context? I don't know. But I think Tomer will be able to give us insights into all of that. So having said that, this is the panel, and I am David, co-founder, CEO of Ready GG. I will be talking at 5 if you're interested in what I do, but that's the end of that. So let me begin with Hilmar. Like I said earlier, you have built one of the world's most successful games, EVE Online. I've played it. It's highly compelling. For those of you who haven't played it, it's an open world where really you're trading and you're building spaceships, and it's essentially a proxy for the world or the universe. And I imagine there was a reason you thought it made sense to raise $40 million for a Web3 game. And I'd love to hear what sparked that decision, and what did you learn in EVE that you thought, aha, the blockchain could actually be useful for me? So just try to give us some context from that perspective.
Yeah, so now after 20 years of operating EVE Online, then we have a set of insights which we have almost like scientifically concluded based on a lot of studies of like, why does EVE Online work and how can it be made to work even better? And some of those are kind of counterintuitive. One of those is that the reason why EVE Online has been going for 20 years is primarily an undesigned feature of Eve, which is that through being a capitalistic hellscape of PvP skullduggery, it actually is the best place to make new friends. It just so happens when the place is dark and gloomy, then having a friend has a much higher meaning if it compared to living in a utopia. This we have then started to develop more and more into Eve itself. But other takeaways are, and what is driving us to explore a Web3 version of an MMO, is that about 4,000 developers have joined us in creating the experience that is Eve. Like around Eve, there's a whole ecosystem of fan sites, applications, management softwares, Discord bots, Slack integrations, like you wouldn't believe. And this is created by 5,000 developers or 4,000 developers. You can go to Awesome Eve on GitHub and see an inventory of all the software that's been created. So CCP is in the minority of writing software for EVE Online. And it just happens that using an API with metering and whatnot to manage this is not like a great way. If blockchains have proven anything, and they could be accused of not maybe proving a lot, but what they have proven is that distributed development, they're a great way to organize that. Smart contracts with execution metering is a way better construct than an API. So part one, harness the developer ecosystem in a way that hasn't been done before. Check. Number two is that also related to this, all these third-party developers, they are paying for their AWS bills with like Google Ads, they're streaming on Twitch, they're doing YouTube, they're all trying to come up with some janky ways, mostly to pay for their own OpEx, but also trying to make due on just, you have to also live your life. And your day job might be interfering with your Eve job as a software developer, not as a miner in the future. So finding a way, and all games have this, there's an ecosystem around every game, and just a tiny portion of it is a little island that the companies are holding on to, like they're clinging on to every single cent. And then they're dishing it out very carefully with license agreements and like God knows what. This is what we currently do. And I think there is just a better way to build a more inclusive business model, and it's good to distinct between business and monetization. Those are separate things. To build a business model that captures or like puts the ring around the whole ecosystem and just putting a ring around a little company clinging on to every cent.
So if I understand this, it sounds like you have a creator economy, in a way. We could call it a creator economy. And that you see with Web3 a way to reduce the friction in scaling that creator economy. And is that a good kind of conclusion from what you're...
Yes, you could simplify it down to that. It is more about like, it's more about innovating on it. Like you can refine creative economy, I mean Roblox, Fortnite, Creator Edition, various versions of Minecraft, janky business models, are a way to refine it. But these are not like holistic innovations of like fundamentally building it from the first principles ground up like that. And I know that because I've been piecemealing it and quilting it after the fact. Now I want to like just design for this design premise from the get-go. And I would more say like it's an innovation slash transformation. And at that point, it stops being the creator economy. It's more like it's a digital nation with a big business model.
Right. So would you say there are things in the game design, or maybe it's too early for this, but when you look at the actual game design of what you're trying to create now, are there shifts in the fundamental game design that would be impossible in Web 2?
They're not impossible. They're not impossible. They just, it's usually with tech transitions, you can do everything with the old stuff. It just becomes patches on top of patches on top of patches. Just by doing a clean state. We used to do horses. We can make them poop less. We can build their horseshoes. We can breed them so they're like faster and whatnot. And we can also make cars. Sure, in the beginning, the cars are slower and there are no gas stations and like whatnot, but they're more future-proof. So it's more like that transition of like, okay, here's just a premise, which is a new design space. Now we're going to engineer from the ground up a business model for an ecosystem like this.
And would you say, because this is now going to tie in a little bit, I think, to Evin and Tomer, would you say that the data or the information related to these participants in this new ecosystem, will it be owned by those participants or owned by you? How do we think about that data ownership, the stuff that's on chain, basically?
So, I mean, ownership is a very complicated topic, mostly made popular by Hammurabi in Babylon 4,000 years ago, where he invents the Code of Hammurabi and says, I have police to enforce, I have military to protect the clay tablets in the basement. So I guess the premise of Web3 is kind of, now we're going to have nerds with keys and consensus, and we're not going to have any police and military to protect it. It's nerds with algorithms. And now we all of a sudden own our own things. I mean, like, same. There are opportunities. Again, it's a new design premise that it's nerds with consensus and not Hammurabi with a code and tablets and police. And it does open up opportunities. I think when you think about it in a mainstream sense, owning your own data is an extremely academically esoteric concept that maybe 50 years from now, our children's have a way to relate with it. And us here trying to make up that future, we relate to it very strongly. I think people just generally don't care as much about it. And they also don't really know what identity is. I mean, most of our identities reside somewhere at Google through the inventions of cookies, which were supposed to be a decentralized way to have a relationship with a website. It turns into a hideous, aggregated ad targeting machine. So I think let's not lose sight of the fact that these are very esoteric concepts.
Well, I'm going to ask Evin about this because I'm wondering whether you agree with whether or not this is esoteric, because I think you're building a company founded on the idea that people actually do want to own their data. And you actually mentioned to me while we were off stage that this notion of a mindset of play, you literally use this phrase, mindset of play, is critical to get everyday people to perhaps overcome the concerns that Hilmar is raising. But maybe I'm wrong about this. You tell me, how do you feel about what he just said?
I agree completely. I think that often, though we enjoy this vocabulary in circles like this, especially, for those of us who hang out on GitHub a lot, we care very deeply about, the storage, custodianship, signing, delegation of data. But at the end of the day, human beings largely are just trying to get through their day with less friction, more value, more delight, more output, and less confusion. So the ability to control data written about you, the ability to share data that describes you, as Hilmar noted, largely that's happened kind of under the hood in a way that we as individuals largely do not observe or don't really reckon with, other than the GDPR pop-ups that have ruined the internet on this side of the pond. But when we talk about the value for human beings, in the United States where I'm from, for example, Americans spend about 11.5 billion hours a year filling out forms. That means re-entering data over and over again, probably making some mistakes along the way too. So when we talk about the sort of meme of ownership of data, really what I hear is allowing data to move with its subject, so that when I show up, so too does the list of things I've done or the preferences that I have. That would allow me to shortcut onboarding. It would allow an application to see more of me than just the public tokens mapped to my address, but perhaps also interact with my primary language. Or if you come up and scan my fingernail later, proof that we were here in this place together in control of our
Just to point out, you have a code on your fingernail, and if I put my phone, and which finger is it on?
So I'm not going to lift it up for the audience.
I was hoping you would actually, because it's on the middle one.
What this is sort of anchoring in to be very, very tangible here is that the concept of privacy is esoteric, as you note. This premise of owning your own data, well, what would I do with all these JSON files if I downloaded them and printed them out? That's pretty difficult to contend with, because it doesn't start with user value. It doesn't help me get through my day more swiftly. It just gives me more files to manage. And so at Disco, what we care very deeply about is making sure that data portability is enabled in an easy manner for developers, but that we take steps out of the user journey that you were planning to take otherwise for individuals representing organizations or using tools just as themselves.
So yeah, just to be clear, so disco.xyz is the company, and you are building essentially the tools to enable people like us to what? Affiliate and create a new Web3 identity and then put our data in there. Like, how would you describe that user journey so the room
Sure.
understands better like what this is?
Well, you referenced one of our favorite phrases earlier, the first product that we rolled out, the data backpack. So if we think about our Web3 wallets today, those are largely, allow us to control tokens that are mapped to our public keys. Some of those tokens may be wanted, some may be unwanted or unsolicited, but we have the ability to control them with those keys and show up in different applications, essentially carrying those tokens with us or allowing for them to be, leveraged on our behalf in multiple environments. But taking only your wallet, only your financial assets as your means of introduction is pretty limited. Right? Your financial assets are not sufficient to personalize experiences for you or to curate content or to help with discoverability or finding friends in gloomy places. And so in order to be more expressive with our addresses, in order to enjoy experiences personalized to more than just the tokens that we own, but to actually be personalized to our traits, our preferences, past experiences, relationships, or even folks we've met here at the BITKRAFT Summit, we need more data in a form that is not globally public without consent. And so we've gotten really good in Web3 at having data that is private only to our keys, data that is public to everyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection for all time on chain, and moderating the range of publicity and sharing in between those extremes in a form that is not trapped in a single app, trapped to a single chain. That is what we make really easy with our developer tools and applications.
So I want to hold on that because I think this actually relates to what Tomer is working on, because Tomer is building really the method by which you can analyze this data and make decisions. And so this raises the question, as people maybe want to not have that data be viewable or have that data viewable, Tomer, how do you think about the privacy implications, and how do you think about will there be sufficient data to do these analytics if people have the optionality to maybe not make it visible? So there's permissions, I think, that come into this, but why don't you tell the room a little bit, what you're building and explain the thesis around addressable.
Thank you. So I deeply believe in the thesis that blockchain actually enables preserving some of the privacy we don't have in the previous world of Web 2, because in Web 3, you have an anonymous identity. And in this anonymous identity, you can use to do things that are public, like playing games or buying some different tokens or trading in different places, or enjoying this anonymity while you can actually pay, which wasn't possible before. And at Addressable, using all of those signals, all of the blockchain data, to create audiences of people that do something. Now, this is very useful for marketing, for advertisements, but without the need to know people's names or private data. And what Evin is saying is that whenever you want to use the private data, you can actually moderate it and put it encrypted in some way that will enable the protocol to expose this data only to those applications you want to expose. But all the public data about what people are buying, what people are doing, what people are actually having fun of, what they're showing off from their wallet, this public data enables everyone or every business in a very equal way to access the data. So everybody's equal. So all the businesses that want to target or create a campaign to all the gamers, all the games are equal in this space of Web3. You can target gamers in a targeted campaign very accurately because you can just select all the people that played a game from your genre in the past 5 days. And what Addressable is doing is the missing link of Web3, because Web3 is a payment option and it's an identity. It's fully private. You don't have to expose anything about yourself, except for the fact that you can pay with that and the things that you buy. And what we do in Addressable, we connected this layer to audiences of social media. So in social media, you can actually advertise. You can advertise very accurately. And the way we do this is privacy preserving. So you can, it's the missing link of communication. So whenever you want to grow outside of your community, you want to actually advertise. You want to scale your game or your app 10x. and your community is this size, and you want to go from 100,000 people to 1 million, how do you advertise to the right people? How do you know who's in Web3, what they do, what they like? And this is taking the power from the big tech to all the small businesses. Any game studio can actually advertise with all of this richness of this data without using big tech, because everyone is equal, and the big tech is not controlling all of the data about who bought what.
I have a practical question here. As a marketer, potentially, am I still running a Facebook ad or a TikTok ad or some other ad connected to Web3, or is this a method where I can disintermediate Meta, disintermediate Google, not pay the tax to them, and somehow talk directly to that Web3 person? And where would the ad show up then if it's not in a social feed? So I'm just kind of curious about the basic mechanics. Where does this actually happen?
So as of today, people are paying attention to ads in wherever they spend time. And they spend time on Facebook, on TikTok, on Twitter, etc. So, and on other ad networks, in other games. So we advertise on ironSource and Unity. All the ad networks were built according to the places where people spend time in and where their attention is put. Now, we definitely build this connection between Web3 data and ad networks data in a very scalable and flexible way. So to your question, the ads are running in all those ad networks, in Twitter, on ironSource, on Unity, and others. And in the future, when more sophisticated ad networks are established on Web3, a way of communicating over Web3, like Lens and others, Ethermail, if those things catch up with the scale of Web2 advertising, then we can advertise there. It will be much easier. But we advertise wherever people spend their time.
But how would if you knew somebody was doing XYZ on the blockchain, how would you then be able to tell from Facebook who they are on Facebook? I mean, isn't there kind of how do you connect that attribution? Because right now it feels like those are two very different sets of data.
So we have correlated audiences of dozens of millions of people from the Web3 layer according to behavioral patterns to Twitter. So behavioral patterns on Twitter correlate with behavioral patterns on the chain, on the major EVM chains. So whatever people do on chain, usually they follow or they retweet on Twitter, and the signals correlate very well. We do this anonymously, so we don't do this personally, but with small segments. So create ambiguity in order not to enable any kind of direct link from person to person, but only to small enough segments that will be very significant in marketing. And when we connect the data from on-chain to Twitter, then we have this connection. That was the first thing we did. We launched this almost a year ago, and we then connected farther to Reddit, to some SSPs like ironSource, Unity. So identifiers from different networks connected back to wallets enable us to not only target or create targeted campaigns, real ads to those Web3 wallet owners, but also to do the attribution. So once wallets come into your application, to your game, and they convert, or even they just connect their wallet, we can tell you what segments they come from. What segments, what do they like, what do they do, what do they buy, what community they're part of, and then you can expand your audience very, very effectively.
Understood. So I know we have a little bit of time left, and I am mindful that I did say the audience may potentially have some questions. Now, I know you don't have microphones out there, and you may be feeling a little shy, but if any of you have a question for our panelists, this is an opportune moment. It can be related to any of the things we've talked about. Do I have anyone in the audience who may have something to ask? And happy to relay the question. Like I said, no need to be shy. Any takers here? All right. Well, what I'll say is this. What I think we should potentially address at the end are really what are the economic implications here as we see this world coming together. And we can debate maybe the speed with which it uptakes. But assuming it does sort of scale, what do we think the economic implications might be for how the flow of money shifts in this new world? I don't know, Evin, if that's something you've thought about, or
Certainly. And well, am I hearing?
Thank you. I'm
hearing
on the hunt for you.
I'm hearing some weird feedback, by the way. If someone's talking on another microphone, please stop.
So I think, earlier we were noting how in the Web3 ecosystem, we've essentially united the payment and identity rails, meaning that we have identifiers that can compel currency and also, represent other signing and associated capabilities. When we think about the economic implications here, this means that both data and financial value can run on these rails and inform the way that financial value is distributed, the way that privileges are granted in game environments and across applications as well. And so viewing data as not only an act of labor, but a store of value that does not immediately become the property of the environment where it was created, but rather the party who created it, that's where I see a significant shift. And to Tomer's earlier point, the relationship between addresses and the contextual data about them helps us understand how to interact with those parties and gives us new methods of engaging economically, be it around ad networks based on addresses or groups of affinity that we otherwise would have struggled to find.
And I'm wondering, Hilmar, do you buy all this stuff, or are you kind of skeptical? What's your thought here?
So what I do buy is what you said about Americans spend 11 billion hours filling out forms. It sounds like a huge friction that is valuable to take away. And then I was thinking, okay, sounds crazy, but why do I not associate as much with it? And I can tell you a story. So I'm from Iceland. Iceland is a tiny, tiny country. It's smaller than EVE Online, just to give you a sense. And because it's small, the trust is very high inside Iceland. So we tend to trust our government because it's mostly our uncles and aunts which are in the government. The country is that small. So we have this uniform IT system inside the country, so I never have to fill out any forms when I'm in Iceland. There's just a little app, and I could just choose permissions. I can sign up for bank accounts, whatever. Never have to take a gas bill. There's also no gas because it's all geothermal. So I never fill out any forms in Iceland. Then I moved to the UK, and oh my God, why do you need my gas bill? I mean, don't you have a register of where I live? And they don't. Because they don't trust the government to store the data in any proper way, I guess. I'm speculating. So, okay. And then we transpose into value. So in the world where the government of Iceland is doing this, they're not doing it for profit. They're just doing it purely for reducing friction in the economy and increasing speed. And thus, all the companies involved have a much simpler relationship with the registry than they do otherwise. The challenge with value capture, it's always going to be a company. It's going to capture value. It's going to hoard the value. It's going to sit on it, and it's going to try to increase it. This is the nature of companies. Run a company for 20 years. It's a natural law. So I just wonder a bit, is there a non-profit way to address this? Because the value is enormous. And as soon as somebody starts to hoard it, and you can also do that in Web3, there's going to be hoarding of value somewhere. Somebody is going to be a dragon on top of a gold pile, and they want to increase it. So I would maybe bring that into, are these fundamental things better organized than for business companies? I realize I'm saying this at an investor conference.
Okay.
So it's...
No taboos.
Capture is real everywhere.
But I think what you're saying occurs in other countries. My understanding is Estonia has something maybe somewhat similar. I was pretty astonished recently when I learned that in South Korea, to get a phone number, you have to have ID, like a mobile number, which has given the Korean government amazing abilities to control for inappropriate content with children on phones, because they actually have all of this provable data around the phone number. And I was like, wait, that actually solves maybe a little bit of the problem around Instagram and teenagers being traumatized. Yeah. But I mean, we do have precedent for governments, I guess, doing this, right?
Yeah, and doing it well. The system in Iceland is largely just, everyone loves it. It's super simple. Never fill out the form again.
In the government, as in the game, verifiable credentials, which are the data primitive, one of the data primitives we work with at Disco, they're embraced everywhere from Xbox gaming to the Department of Homeland Security. So the nice thing is that we're kind of all working using these public open standards in a manner where we can start to capture this data, but we need to solidify, refine those user journeys, as we were discussing earlier, anchored in a sense of play that invites people to have a more open approach to new manners of interacting. In the same way that DeFi, crypto, Twitter, and early connected experiences invited more out-of-the-box thinking and courageousness for users to learn new things, we can make that barrier to participation lower if we anchor these experiences in things that are deeply human, whether finding friends in gloomy places, successful raids, or even being served the correct content for your needs.
Yeah, so would you say at the end your level of optimism around the benefits that some of this might bring? Are you pessimistic, optimistic? Where would you rank yourself on that scale?
I am always exceptionally optimistic, especially given my co-panelists here today and the folks gathered at the BITKRAFT Summit.
Excellent. Nice. You brought a disco ball. So, how could you not be an optimist if you bring a disco ball wherever you go?
Of course, yes. If you're interested in trying out verifiable data for yourself, come and scan the disco ball too.
Excellent. Tomer, any last words from you before we wrap up here?
I agree with Hilmar. Businesses are the best way to organize, and businesses have to be served well in this space of Web3. And this is why a lot of the space is now building for businesses to be able to use this space alongside its gaps and things that are not working so well. So I deeply believe that businesses will be there and capture some value, but we have to make it equal and try to allow all new businesses to be as productive as the old and big ones.
Well, with that, I'm going to thank you, Tomer, for coming all the way in from Israel. We know it's a hard time, and we appreciate your making the effort to be here. Thank you. And to our panelists up here on the stage, thanks again for this great conversation. And you're here for the rest of the day and tomorrow, so anyone who does finally have a question, you'll know where to find them. So thank you all for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.